All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to the final installment in 2025 of our Global Learning Commons virtual events. We are so privileged, honored to welcome Tyler Thigpen, who is a man that I have known and looked up to for many years, going back to his time as a partner at Transcend Education. And it's kind of hard to describe everything that Tyler does because it feels like he's everywhere. But he is the CEO and head of school at the Forest School, which is just an unbelievable school. If you don't know about the Forest School, check it out. You're going to hear about it today. If you just go on their website, the first thing that you're going to see is this bold question: what if school were designed to cultivate all aspects of flourishing? And we're going to hear a little bit about that today from Tyler, but he's also an author, does a lot with the Institute. Well, he's the founder of the Institute for Self-Directed Learning, does all these other amazing things, and just such an honor to have you here, Tyler. We're going to get going here in just a second. For those of you who haven't been here before, we're going to hear 15-20 minutes from Tyler. Then we're going to go into breakout rooms to kind of reflect on what you heard, and then come back with some questions and kind of a community discussion around what we're hearing and what can we do. So, Tyler, without further ado, you're on, my man.
All right. Hey, y'all. Can you hear me okay? Great. And I'm going to share my screen with you guys. It's great to be with y'all. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
Awesome. I'm grateful to the Filtering International team. I was telling them in advance of this call that as we were building our building, one of the things that I gleaned from them in a conversation that was so helpful was just thinking through how learners are over the course of a day and just in different modes and how you can make sure that the design of your, learning environment accommodates those different modes throughout the day. Modes like collaboration, creation, discussion, hosting, that sort of thing. A simple idea, but pretty profound for me who had never built a building before. So grateful to the team, grateful to be with y'all to kind of riff on student agency in action. And I see a few familiar faces here, and it's great to meet other folks, and hopefully we can learn from one another. And as Nate mentioned, I'm with the Forest School and Acton Academy, the Forest School Online, which is a global online school, and the Institute for Self-Directed Learning. I also teach at the University of Pennsylvania. My team, who I'm representing proudly today, these are many of them, and they're sort of spread out in Georgia and across the world, including Thailand. A few just key features of our learning environment that's in person. It's a pre-K through 12 learning environment that's diverse by design. We have guides, not teachers. We have mixed age studios, not classrooms. We have badges, not grades. We have contracts instead of rules that are made by our learners. We have questions, not lecture. There's no homework. Hands-on project-based learning. The e-learning that we do is self-paced. Apprenticeships start in middle school. It's diverse by design, and our learners actually designed our building 5 years ago. We did a quest, which is our word for a project, where if you could design any school, what would you design? And they got together and put together, a bunch of different ideas, and they presented and pitched them to architects and GCs, general contractors, and the best ideas won. And what you see on our campus today is what our learners designed. So that's a little overview of our environment. But I'd love to ask you guys. Imagine that, and I know we've got a diverse set of stakeholders who are here on the call, both in and outside of education. And so if you could just imagine one of your team members comes to you frustrated saying, we just can't get our students or employees or teachers to take ownership of their learning. We've tried everything. Do you have any advice? What is the first thing that you would say to them? Would you drop that in the chat? Jane, I would love to invite you. Jane, why would you say how much ownership do they have over what they learn? Can you say a few sentences more about that, Jane?
Yeah. Hi, Tyler.
Hey.
Uh, um, I think that if you're asking people to take ownership over any kind of learning, it very frequently is set in a structure or institution that like how much safety, how much ownership do they already have? I feel like so often in a lot of settings, teachers, employees, and students are given what they're supposed to be doing rather than making choices or having ownership. So I think that question is meant to say, like, what are the structures?
That's great. That reminds me of Megan, you were quick out of the gate and joining us from Helsinki. I'm a massive fan of 100 and have been an ambassador in the past and love what you guys do internationally. Megan, why did you say, did you ever ask them what they wanted to learn?
Yeah, I just found that so often we overlook these basic questions, right? If you don't ask, you don't know. And so often what we found working with young people is just we can start and daydream and make up all sorts of answers to our questions, but the best thing is always to go to the source and start there.
That's great. Josh, your question, I don't know if you're a therapist or counselor, but this sounds like a question I've heard from my therapist or counselor before. Tell me more. Say more about that. Josh, is that what came up for you when you wrote that?
I once had a fellow teacher tell me that I should have gone into the priesthood, so I hear you. Um, that's I just think that we're so quick to start asking the more what we call in Hawaii, there's a small fish called the manini questions. And I think that the real question here is where is this question coming from? And I think when you do that, you open the door to a much bigger conversation into which everything that has been shared in the chat starts to come to light. So that's I love acknowledging because I did that for my entire career as a teacher, acknowledging that questions like the one that you ask here up on screen are great questions. I think it's a great way to start.
Sounds like you have some experience coaching, a lot of folks, which is awesome. Thank you all for your great thoughts. Today in the time that I share, I want to just sort of riff with you all and learn with you all. How do we lead so that others engage with learning? Whether that's our students, whether it's our staff, whether it's our employees. And I want to share two frameworks that our organization, our team uses to think through engagement. And I want to invite y'all to these, what I call SIW and SIS, stealing ideas, excuse me, sharing ideas willingly and stealing ideas shamelessly from one another. And I know Fielding does a great job of facilitating these conversations in the past. The first framework there's one of my colleagues, Dr. Caleb Collier, who heads up our Institute for Self-Directed Learning, published a peer-reviewed study on, becoming an autonomous learner and identified a pathway. I've got a mountain here with a little climber. It may be a mountain, it may be a cycle, it may not be linear, but we have sort of in the research and practice identified four phases. The first of which is foundational. It's building a desire to learn. And that's when our learners or our staff or employees, they have their basic needs met. So they're not hungry, they're not thirsty, they're feeling safe. As somebody, Jane, I think you mentioned that. They have found motivation. They see relevance in what it is that's before them, which we can't take for granted. So they have their own understanding of their own why for what they're doing. They also feel like they belong, so they feel safe and they feel like they can contribute. With young kids, our 3, 4, and 5 year olds, I talk about like a baby deer, just being having core needs met, and knowing how to get around. Phase two is kind of when learners or employees start to play in advanced player mode, and instead of doing something easy they do something challenging. Like instead of surfing the internet, they'll choose to read a hard book, or instead of talking to a friend that they love, they'll choose to work on a super hard math problem or something. They'll choose to do something challenging instead of something immediately gratifying. And then that's when they start to practice good habits. Phase three is when learners are really taking initiative and they're not just uh, solving problems. They're actually finding problems. They're identifying tasks to complete, problems to solve, making plans, using goal protocols even. SMART goals are very popular. If you've ever heard of WHOOP goals, these are great. Wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. Wish, what do you hope's going to happen? Outcome, what are some of the measurable ways to define that? Obstacle, what's going to get in your way as you tackle that? And then, what's your plan to overcome those obstacles? They're evaluating their own progress and they're revising their plans. Again, for our 4-year-olds, it's like you're a fox. And then phase four, this is what we want for all of our learners, ourselves, for our employees, is persistence. They're going to see tasks all the way through to completion. They're going to persevere even when it's a struggle. For kids, we'll say it's like no, nothing's going to stop that beaver from building that dam. You know, so four phases is what we've sort of identified, and desire in my brain, it's DRIP is the acronym: desire, resourcefulness, initiative, persistence. But would love to just open it up briefly. Like, do you have any questions about that framework? This is really when we think about engagement, this is a way of thinking about the pathway towards someone becoming so engaged that nothing's going to stop them. Any questions about that pathway? And then I'm curious, genuinely, if you is there anything you would add, subtract, or change about this pathway? Feel free to come off mute and show us or share with us.
Tyler, can I just, oh, Alex is going to raise, Alex, before you go, before you jump, just a quick thought. I love this, and it feels to me like when you when you're well into the journey, you're getting into flow.
Hmm.
And that's the object. That's the North Star. That's what keeps you learning throughout your whole life, is that feeling that you have of flow as you're learning, as you're climbing up that mountain. So love it.
That resonates. Maybe one more question or comment?
Alex.
Thank you. To your previous point, I think kids are hardwired to learn. They just sometimes learn things which adults don't appreciate, and I think sometimes adults get in the way of this with their agenda of what learning is rather than the children's own agenda. So I think there's a kind of question of priorities and who's in charge of that learning.
Well said.
When you said their learning, is it their learning or your learning?
Right. Well said. Is it top down? Is it compliance based? You know, or do they have genuine motivation? Which is really phase one. The second, so again, I think again the provocation I have for us here is how might we lead communities where students, employees, teachers, get practice at taking ownership of their learning so that they're fully engaged. And the second framework I want to share with you can also be found in a book that my co-founders and I wrote, Caleb, Brittany, and Amber, The Playbook for Self-Directed Learning, published by Routledge. And I'm just going to and this is essentially the chapter's outline of it. But there's kind of a difference, to Alex's point, between top-down teacher-led models and then like truly learner-led, learner-centered, self-determined, self-directed, whatever language you want to use. There's a lot of student agency, a lot learner-driven, learner-led. There's a great number of lingo out there, but there is a difference in what happens. On the one hand, in a teacher-led top-down experience, the adults, to Alex's point, are really the ones who are doing most of the choosing. Whereas in a learner-centered experience, learners are choosing. And what you see here on the right-hand side, this is the courtyard of the building that our learners designed for their school, and they chose to have their dance here. They designed the dance, the theme, everything. They chose the date, all the things. They were so capable. They actually hosted a haunted house just twice, 2 years ago, and then this year again. They made $6,000 the first year, and then this year I think they made $4,500. But the learners chose to do this, and they were using their math, using their geometry, using their science, using their English to like do something real. But they get a chance to choose. Another component is in a top-down teacher-led experience, teachers are really the ones doing the evaluating for the most part. But in a learner-centered experience where they're super engaged, Learners are assessing through peer review, through expert review, and through self-evaluation. And it's messier, when learners are self-evaluating, and they may not be talking about the things that exactly like we want them to talk about, but they're getting practice. They're taking ownership of their own learning and evaluating in ways that are pretty next level. In teacher-led experiences, teachers are really the ones setting the pace and deciding destinations and time frames. Whereas in learner-led experiences, learners are often setting the pace. What you see on the left side of the screen there is an example of some what we call running partners, which is where learners each day at our school with one other person set their goals for the day, and they decide how much they want to get done over what period of time, and they share that with one another. They give feedback. Um, that's Charlie and Layla. And then on the right-hand side, this is a public school who's one of our institute's partners in North Georgia, North Hall High School, that we wrote about in the book. And this is their math department. And one of the tall guy in the background, he gave all of the kids in his math classes all the standards for a semester and said, "Hey, you just need to master and learn these things. Do it at your own pace, and just tell me when you're ready." And then he gave them all the resources that they need, and he made himself available for questions. And then he said, "Go." And then they took ownership, and were engaged, and they were able to prove mastery in their own ways. In a teacher-led experience, teachers will do a lot of talking and lecture, whereas in a learner-led experience, there's a lot more exploration. One of the things we know about deep learning is we have to have a degree of control over what it is that we are exploring, what it is we're studying, investigating, doing, both as adults and as young people. Otherwise, we're not really going to learn deeply. What you see there, this is the inside of a few of our buildings. It's almost like a co-working space for kids. You might think about it like that. Is learners kind of doing their own thing, and they're exploring, some of their own goals. And on the picture in the middle there with the girls at the whiteboard, that's them kind of working through a math problem together that they identified, like, hey, we need to talk about this, as a studio. In a top-down experience, there's a lot of, explanations that are happening where teachers are explaining. In a learner-led experience, there's still a role for the caring adults or the bosses to show world-class examples, to ask Socratic questions, and then to facilitate peer-to-peer learning. In a teacher-led experience, teachers are often at the front, and we love this GIF, whatever you want to call it, of The Simpsons. Teachers in a learner-led experience, the adults, the bosses, they're alongside, they're there, or they're in the background. Um, in a teacher-led experience, classrooms are often quiet and controlled and compliant, whereas in where there's more engagement, classrooms are actually busy and they can sometimes appear chaotic. This is on the top right is a film project our learners were doing, and then a group discussion that learners began in the top left picture. We actually, when we moved away from one building to the other, we did a research study, our institute did, on our learners. Most research about school design is done in traditional, like, teacher-led schools. But at Forest, we're a learner-led, mixed-age, self-directed model. And so we wanted to capture their perceptions and attitudes when we were moving from a traditional campus to a more learner-centered, learner-designed campus. And so we interviewed 30 learners, ages 8 to 18, about space, about focus and motivation. And, essentially with four key findings. The best design, according to them, was open areas with small private nooks. Uh, Number two, organized supplies, visible guides, and low clutter really help for self-direction and engagement. Number three, nature and natural light improve mood and productivity. So our school has a lot of high ceilings and a lot of expensive windows, two of which just broke. They're expensive. Number four, comfort and aesthetics strongly shape motivation and the quality of work. And then just a few final components of this framework. In a teacher-led experience, teachers are responsible to meet learner needs, whereas in a learner-centered environment, where there's a lot of agency, teachers are providing supports for sure, but they're guiding learners to become self-aware and to self-advocate to get their needs met. In a teacher-led experience, teachers are making rules. In a learner-centered experience where learners are deeply engaged or employees are, teachers are designing learning challenges, incentives, and natural consequences for learners to experience. Often the learners themselves are the ones who are actually making the rules and making contracts of promises. In a teacher-led experience, teachers set goals, whereas in a learner-led experience, learners set goals. When the pandemic came upon us all in March of 2020, in terms of moving from in-person brick and mortar to at-home learning. Our learners thrived not because we're wizards, but they had already had practice at setting their own goals every day for years, and so they just went home and kept setting goals. And so our school was listed in this NGLC study on, what made them so well prepared. And then I think the last component of the framework is that in a teacher-led experience, teachers form deep relationships with students, but in a learner-centered environment, teachers, they're forming actually networks of deep relationships for students, appreciating that we actually cannot, we cannot get to know however many students we have in front of us deeply, but if we can make sure through a process that learners have enough relationships to be known, heard, and understood, that's super powerful for them. So before we go into the breakout groups, any clarifying questions about this framework?
Well, Tyler, it's beautiful. And I know we're going to dig into it in the breakouts and the discussion, but I'm curious, do you bring people down to the Forest School for site visits?
We do. We've had 800 plus leaders over the last 8 years come to Forest for site visits, for training, for accelerators, workshops. So yes.
Awesome.
Can you give more, like an example of how teachers design learning challenges and incentives in learner-led experiences?
Yes. So we've actually identified 9 different evidence-based learning modalities, which are basically like these are the kinds of things that if a human does, learning will follow. It will flow naturally. Things like discussing, the person who talks is the person who learns, exploring, making, um, evaluating, sharing, reflecting, submitting, relating things to their own lives. Essentially, when our guides at Forest and the schools that we work with, when they design learning challenges, it's like it's inviting them to almost play a game, that has them doing those different modalities. It has them discussing, exploring, evaluating, making, reflecting, submitting, sharing, those sorts of things, because we know that engenders deep learning. And sometimes there's a prize, sometimes there's not a prize. So it's designing the parameters of a game as well, and seeing what the learners take up, and just giving them at bats and opportunities for practice. So it looks and feels, I know there's a lot more detail, but it looks and feels generally at a high level like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I was just curious about like what kind of like those incentives look like to that still like maintain like intrinsic motivation.
Yeah. So the Forest school model is actually agnostic to intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators, except that we want the motivators to be intrinsic, but recognizing that sometimes as humans, like knowing the potential negative consequences of our actions can actually motivate us. So we work intentionally to design 4 different kinds of motivators baked in our learning environment and then continuously interrogate like their efficacy. But one category of motivators would be individual intrinsic motivators, where it's just like, hey, you're talking about a kid's hero's journey, you're talking about their story and their purpose and calling in life. Another would be a group intrinsic motivator, like, letting them make the rules and then holding them accountable to those rules and like holding them to that level of character. And then there you've got extrinsic individual motivators where they are, maybe they get a prize or they get points or whatever. And then also extrinsic group motivators, kind of like in Harry Potter's houses, you can get house points and win the house cup or something, or compete against another studio or something. So we always try and look to see that there are different options of different kinds of motivators in our learning environment. And we find that learners are motivated differently. Some are definitely more intrinsically motivated, some are definitely more extrinsically motivated, some are more motivated individually, and some are more motivated communally.
Tyler, there's a great question. I just don't want to lose it. Is there a place that you have published more information on those 9 modalities, or is the book the right resource? Where would you guide somebody looking for more information on your modalities?
Yep. I'm going to stop my share and then drop a couple articles that we've published on it that are on our website. Um, so I'll drop the general page of our resources. So these are free research. Our institute does research for the field that's open source, that's linked there. And then I'll drop a specific article to the modalities.
Really quick, Josh, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just really quick. A few weeks ago, I was in Phoenix with a bunch of you from Fielding, and Anna, I think it was you who recommended a book called Joyful, which I am reading right now. It might have been Jesse, I'm not sure. But Tyler, one of the first elements of that book has to do with the remarkable discovery that color has everything to do with joy. And I'm wondering from a design perspective at the school, as I looked at all of your slides, what I saw was just a riot of color happening in every direction. And I wonder the extent to which that's intentional and that bright, colorful environments lead to that kind of joyful engagement that you seek.
Yes, we have a number of artists in our community. Our school is based next to the largest movie studios in North America. It's called Trilith Studios. And so we've got a lot of storytellers, creators, makers, a lot of family members and learners who are interested in the story arts. One of my 4 kids, my son Oz, is 18, and he forewent college to actually go into the film industry. And so we partnered with a few of our parents, as well as a local design firm, to build off the color palette that we already had for our school, which you can see in our ELA curriculum, which I'm dropping here in the chat. And then they extended this color palette to make 5 unique color palettes, one for each studio, that are complementary to the colors that you see, on this website. That was kind of our approach.
Wow, that's awesome, Tyler. Amazing. Thank you.
I see one more question from Mrs. Hogan, and then we can do our breakouts after that. And then we'll have more time for more questions after we do our breakout.
I actually just have a question in regards to design. I heard you say that your students were, or the learners were very involved with the design, and I'm very interested in that also. But what does it look like? Where are they learning? So I saw in the few pictures, are they learning together? Can you tell more about the studios so that you can kind of understand that environment a little more
Sure.
clearly?
We're a micro school. Our in-person environment is a micro school, brick and mortar, that has 5 studios. So the first youngest is ages 3 through 6, so pre-K 3 through grade 1, which has 27 learners. Our next studio is lower elementary, grades 2 and 3, which has 28 learners, and they have their own studio, 2,100 square feet.
Okay.
Each studio is 2,100 square feet, and kind of like a co-working space for kids. And then our third studio is upper elementary, grades 4 and 5, which has 30 learners. Middle school is grades 6 through 8 all together, which has 39 learners ish. And then high school has about 45 learners, and that's grades 9 through 12 all together. And
Okay.
they all
Like,
surround, each studio stands alone, and there's a courtyard in the middle.
oh, okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Tyler. All right, so we really encourage everyone to stick into the small groups, to have a time of reflection, to talk to each other. When you get out into the breakouts, if you want to do a quick round of introductions, there'll be like 8 to 10 people for a breakout. But then just get to talk about what did you like, that what you heard, what resonated, and are there any questions that are on your mind? In about 10 minutes or so, we're going to come back and we're just going to get into a discussion with Tyler for the final 20 minutes of our time together. So, Janet, if you could please open up the breakout rooms, you'll be assigned to one, and then we'll come back in about 10 minutes. All right, we were mid-question in our group, and we had the luxury of having Tyler, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask my question. If anyone has any question, and I know fielding folks, you're going to have some, put it in the chat. But also, if there's a question that you see in the chat that you really want answered, upvote it. Give it a thumbs up so that Tyler and I know what's most important to the folks in the room. But the question that we are getting into was, what does a day in the life look like of a student at the Forest School?
Eight to 8:30, learners enter and say hello, greet one another, make themselves comfortable, do whatever they want to do. 8:30 sharp. There is we call it a launch, which is a 15-minute max Socratic discussion where each studio is sitting in a circle. Typically, the guide tells a compelling, interesting story that hooks them and then asks an open-ended question that invites critical thinking, and they debate for 15 minutes. And then after that, they get with their running partner, which I referenced earlier, Charlie and Layla, and set their goals for the day. And then they have a few hours of what we call core skills, where they're working on their reading, writing, math, or particularly, or possibly a passion project. There'll be brain breaks in there. The length of time, if it's Montessori, which is our youngest learners, that they'll be doing Montessori works instead of working, on other things. And that length of core skills, elongates the older that they get. So it's about 3 hours for high schoolers, and then maybe an hour and a half for the youngest, with brain breaks baked in. And then lunch, and then maybe art or PE. And then there's another launch to kick off the afternoon. And the afternoons are typically, hands-on, some sort of experiential learning, whether it's project-based learning or if it's a civilization or if it's story arts and they're writing and sharing stories, in a particular relevant, genre in the a relevant to 2025 in the marketplace. And then to close the day, there's 15 minutes of studio maintenance where the learners are cleaning up after themselves. And then 15 minutes of shout outs where we're giving love to one another for the great character traits and things that we've seen each other do and contribute, and then we go outside and throw the football, wait on parents to pick them up or walk away.
That sounds like a very enriching and wholesome day, and time for kids to get into flow states, as was mentioned earlier. Janet's question that's got 4 upvotes is, how do you train adults, including teachers, admin, and parents, to, quote, get out of the way? And after you have shifted the mindset and culture, how do you sustain it?
Well, I have thoughts on that, but there's some really experienced folks on this call that I think also have some things to say about that too. And before I answer, I would just love to invite anybody who has a strong opinion held loosely on that to share and some experience with that. I'm looking at you, Jim. Jim is a rock star at this, so is Jane, and I know there are others too, but.
Thanks for the call out there, Tyler. That is the work really parents need, I think, the most support. Certainly learners who've been in conventional spaces the longest, they need time to drop in and learn to trust themselves again, trust that they have self-directed ideas that are meaningful and matter. But the parents need the support. And, we host dialogue groups for parents. We bring in families who've been with us longer to act as liaisons and support folks for families. And finding teachers can be challenging. We found when we've gone to teacher job fairs, it can be, the people from the developmental psychology department are always the best. The folks from the teacher prep department, they want to do it teacher led. But what we're also seeing, the research is showing from Ed Reimagine that spaces like Tyler's, ours, other places are supporting teachers who would otherwise leave the field because they weren't feeling great in the conventional space. So that's what I'd say about that. Just support groups for families and finding those right staff who are ready.
I agree. And for us, I'm actually an ordained minister by training, and I feel like a lot of the work I do is pastoral with parents and caregivers in that sense. And I find that many parents and caregivers are bringing to the table, bringing to parenting, bringing to education a lot of anxiety. And so, what I've found helpful is creating dedicated spaces every month that I facilitate where we can, again, SIW and SIS, share ideas willingly, steal ideas shamelessly, and unearth some of those, really call out some of those moments that produce anxiety with us. Maybe a learner is struggling with a math issue and, and we're tempted to lean in and overfunction, or they're procrastinating on something, or they are not speaking well publicly yet and doing their best, highest quality work, and this produces anxiety in some parents and caregivers. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about why we feel anxious. Let's talk about what are some possible anxious responses. And then let's talk about what those anxious responses actually lead to and what the impact is on children. And then let's talk about what's actually true about life and the world, and then talk about some potential other healthier responses and what that leads to, and then the underpinning healthy mindsets for that. So I would just say to this question, for me, that starts in the application to the school, and it happens in onboarding, and it never ends. I mean, it never ends. That is the work. And I probably spend most of my time as a school leader doing that kind of stuff with parents and caregivers because in this moment in history, for lots of different reasons, there's a lot of anxiety that we're swimming in.
There's a couple questions related to kind of operationalizing the forest school. One is related to how breakfast and lunches work, and the other is what exactly does reading, writing, and math look like?
So breakfast and lunch, learners eat breakfast on their own before coming with their families. They will bring snacks and they bring their own lunch and eat wherever. And it's pretty awesome because our learners chose to design an environment that is mixed age. So in our courtyard every day, I mean, we have 3 to 18-year-olds hanging out and eating lunch together, especially when it's warm. And it is awesome. I mean, it is fantastic. And it keeps behavior in check and learners learn how to behave. Middle schoolers learn how to behave around 4-year-olds, which is, we all want them to learn. So that's cool. We're diverse by design, and part of that means economic diversity. So we have a number of families who are, lower income and historically would not be considering independent schools and are paying minimal amounts. And so we can provide lunch support to them by reducing tuition, significantly, because we don't have, so they would qualify for free and reduced lunch in a public setting. But because tuition for them is reduced, they're able to provide lunch for their kids, here. I will say we do sometimes monitor if food gets a lot of sugar in it sometimes, and they're coming to school with a lot of sugar. I'll reach back out to the families and have a conversation, be like, hey, we're seeing some impact of this, in the school, and have that talk. But that's how breakfast and lunch work. And then the other one was about reading, writing, math. Is that right, Nathan?
Yep.
That's a nuanced question. By and large, writing, the writing process, we want learners getting practice at writing stuff that other people see and that has real meaning to them and that is iterated over time, multiple times before going public. Similar to like if you and I were going to publish something together on, Getting Smarter, Education Reimagined, or Jane's blog, like we would iterate that thing, and get feedback on it. Like we want learners to go through that same process, but in, real world genres, TV scripts, mood boards, uh, uh, op-eds, things that are actually happening in the world,
Yeah.
not just stuff that teachers are interested in. Math, we use Montessori math up until fourth grade. We start using Zern, and then we have math labs. Our goal with math, and then for the upper grades, we use Khan Academy. Well, actually, our learners use a lot of different gamified, responsive, and adaptive e-learning platforms for math, and we find the one and allow them to find the one that works best for them. They have to prove mastery by oral defenses and performance tasks and tests. But what we're going for is not short-term, procedural knowledge, but rather long-term, deep conceptual knowledge. And that's work that's ongoing for us, with math. And then reading, I mean, my mom is the reading specialist, Joan, everybody calls her Gigi. She's the school's Gigi, so I just let Gigi do her thing, and she crushes it. Everybody's reading really, really well. I mean, it's a literacy rich environment, you know. And I think a lot of y'all schools and I think youth is much more literacy rich today. I think that is one of the honestly the benefits of social media that we don't talk about a lot, but you know, obviously we have to guard that with limits. There's some massive downsides, but in a literacy rich environment, the reading happens naturally, and we give challenges. Learners get challenges they have to read and make sense of every day. And there's a ton of words everywhere. So that's kind of how, and they, by the way, they get to choose their own books. So we want to cultivate a love for learning. We guide the process, make sure they're making good choices, but they choose their own books every year. So that's how they deepen their reading.
Awesome. There's a healthy sort of thread in the chat that was started with a question around what other schools are similar to the Forest School. I may broaden it to like, what are the schools that are inspiring you or that you look to for getting ideas?
Well, Jims and Janes, y'all should drop your links in the chat here for y'all schools. They're awesome. I'm sure some of you guys. I mean, I would invite anybody who has a rad school to drop it in the chat, and we check it out because I'm sure there are some. I love Redbridge, Orly Friedman, in San Francisco. Who you know, at our school we have freedom levels for our elementary learners where they through hard effort and work they earn points, and then through the you know basically through the good choices that they're making. And then those points generate different freedom levels where they can sit wherever they want, eat whenever they want, work wherever they want, you know, work on whatever they want. And then, you know, that's the highest freedom level. And then it goes down from there.
Hmm.
At Redbridge, they have autonomy levels where they're not grouped by ages or grades, but they're grouped by their level of autonomy,
Hmm.
you know, and their ability to self-direct, their ability to lead their own learning. I think it's a brilliant structure. That's a school that's super inspiring. And then another one, we're partnering with some public schools in Indiana and Georgia to launch new models that are better meeting the needs of parents and caregivers. And Nature's Gift Micro School in Eastern Hancock, Indiana. If you Google that, it's very cool. It's a traditional superintendent just launched that school in August. His name is George Philhauer. He's a partner of ours. And the school has 68 kids, K through 12. Eight of them came from the traditional district. The majority of the other 60 came from homeschool, and then some of them from an independent school. And you know, it features project-based learning. It features a nature-focused instruction. It features self-directed learning and personalized learning. It has flexible attendance, so families can send their kids whenever they want. And I was there on Monday. It's so joy-filled and
Hmm.
anxiety-free. I would check out that school. That's inspiring me.
That was Nature's Gift Micro School. Is that what you said?
Yep, in Indiana.
All right. Excellent. All right. Well, we just have a few more minutes. Is there any other top of mind question? Feel free if you have one, come off mute and just share it right now, and then we'll close out in a few minutes.
No, thanks for dropping that in there.
Tyler, this is Liz. I love the comment that you just shared about a partnership with a public school and a superintendent because, as you know, all of this work is so thrilling and essential for learners, and yet I worry that it is happening more and more because of the micro school movement in spaces that are not really public settings. You know, where it's the public, you know, it's the public domain. So I'm looking always for strategies and ideas for bringing it into the center of the public school space. And just wonder if you could offer. I was at that new school model conference that you were at in Cambridge a couple of months ago, and
Oh, yeah.
again, there's a lot of good stuff happening, and yet I worry that so much of it is happening in a private space or in an ESA space, and just would love your comment about that.
Thanks, Liz. And I think there's probably, I see folks shaking their head on the call here. You know, the exciting thing from where I sit is there are some states that are getting super proactive to address this need. Georgia's one of them, as an example. My state, so our institute has a 3-year long project with them to guide up to 10 public school districts to design new models that parents are going to demand. Um, and we and they are really agnostic to what that model looks and feels like, and it's meant to be a community-driven process, where the superintendent is reaching out to those homeschool families and saying, what would compel you, and then those superintendents then identifying two things. One, things they can already do that are permissionless, where they don't need policy changes. And then number two, Georgia, the Department of Education has said, hey, we have a flexibility waiver system, and the applications we've seen for flexibility waivers over the last decade have not been bold and innovative enough. We'd love to see more bold and innovative flexibility waiver applications. And the DOE is committed to partnering with superintendents to figure out, maybe how to fit a square peg into a round hole and create these new options. And I think what's made that true is some policy conditions at the state level, some leadership, at the state level, both legislatively as well as, educationally, as well as the reality that parents are voting with their feet and in mass, moving outside of the public system in many states. And that is inviting superintendents into a much more entrepreneurial space than maybe in their own minds and hearts they have been in quite a while. So Georgia's an example. I see that happening in other states too, North Carolina, Indiana. There's some states out west, I think, that are doing some similar stuff. And I don't know, it's definitely a moment in our nation, for this, but that's my take.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. And Mike, let's get it started.
Yeah, so just closing down, and I'll just quick piggyback on that. It's a trend we see across the world, not just in the States. The entrepreneurial nature of schools right now is it's pretty impressive. The silver lining of a moment for just innovation, but also challenge and what can come from that. So staying positive about what's possible for schools in these kind of turbulent times. Speaking of rad schools, which by the way, maybe we need to create a website called Rad Schools and just put all these schools on a list somehow. So maybe that's the next step. Here's a rad school. Adam, you're on this call, I think. Hopefully you're still on. Are you still here?
I am. I'm here.
Hey, shameless plug for your own school. I didn't know you were going to be on the call today, but we're coming to visit and we're going to bring a bunch of these friends. So in 30 seconds or less, give us the pitch on why we should come to Chappaqua Central School District and see you.
Yeah, so it's a perfect segue. We're a public school district in New York, highly regulated within the whole system. A lot of traditional curriculum, but just done differently. So like hard charging APs, high performing district, but really pushing hard on the things that we think are broken with regard to serving students. So you'll see a lot of, innovative spaces, integration of technology, student agency, project-based learning, all within this shell of, and the constraints of things that public school districts deal with. So we're like pushing hard on the things that we think are broken in education as much as we can in a public school setting. About 3,500 kids. We're going to focus on mainly K-12 STEAM, and then high school humanities are going to be the focus of the tour.
So said it better than I could. Please join us. The best way to learn and dig into this is to go to schools and work side by side with people that are doing this work and to see the environments and see what's happening with young people. So consider coming to one of our tours. Chappaqua will be a great visit. We always have a good time. And with that, I'll pass it to Nathan to just set up our next GLC meeting and close us up.
All right. Yes, we are going to continue our GLC virtual events in 2026. Our next one will be in Janet, can you put the date in the chat? But it will be with Jason Van Hukelum, which I was actually introduced to this summer by Josh Rapoon, who's on this call from What School Could Be. Jason is the protagonist in a brand new full-length documentary feature called Multiple Choice. If you haven't seen it, find a way to see it. It's amazing. And he has championed this incredible new CTE with academics integrated in a way that I had never seen before in a public district in Virginia, Winchester Public Schools. Go check out the film. come to that. Jason will talk all about the work that they're doing in Virginia, and we'll make sure that that information gets sent out to all of you well in advance. But I just want to really thank all of you through this year. We've had a ton of these virtual events. Thanks for coming back, contributing. I'm going to steal the sharing ideas willingly and stealing ideas shamelessly. Thank you, Tyler. You were awesome today. Really appreciate you all, and have a great rest of your year.
Yep. And of course, reach out to Fielding International if you want to work on any projects together. We're always looking for collaborators and looking to partner with all of you. So stay in touch. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye, everyone.